when I heard my daughter-in-law Jessica's voice through the phone saying, "Oh, we already got married yesterday in Vegas." It was just an intimate ceremony. My world completely shattered. I stood there in my kitchen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to process what she had just told me. My son David, my only child, had gotten married without even telling me it was happening. For 28 years, I had dreamed of this moment. Imagine walking him down the aisle since his father passed away when he was just 12. I had pictured myself helping choose flowers, tasting cakes, maybe even giving a speech about the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them the most beautiful flowers in the world. But instead, I found out about the most important day of my son's life through a casual phone call, delivered with the same tone someone might use to mention they had picked up groceries. "We wanted to keep it simple, just the two of us," Jessica continued. But I could hear David laughing in the background, and it sounded like there were other people there too. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. This was the same son I had worked double shifts to put through college, the same boy I had sacrificed everything for after his father died, and now he couldn't even be bothered to invite me to his wedding. What made it even worse was that I had been supporting them financially for the past 2 years. When David lost his job at the marketing firm, I immediately stepped in to help with their rent. When Jessica needed money for her car repairs, I didn't hesitate to send $800. When they wanted to take a vacation to Miami last summer, I gave them $1,500 because I wanted them to be happy. I had always believed that helping your children was just what good parents did, but now I was starting to wonder if I had been nothing more than a convenient ATM to them. The silence stretched between us as I tried to find words that wouldn't come out as sobs. Finally, Jessica's voice broke through again, but this time it sounded different, almost guilty. "Margaret, are you still there? We were actually hoping you could help us with something." And there it was, the real reason for the call. They hadn't called to share their joy with me or to apologize for excluding me from the biggest day of their lives. They had called because they needed money, just like always. "We need help with the honeymoon expenses," Jessica said, her voice suddenly switching to that sweet, manipulative tone I had grown to recognize over the years. "The hotel in Hawaii ended up being more expensive than we thought, and David's credit card got declined. Could you maybe wire us $2,000? We promise we'll pay you back as soon as we get home." I felt my stomach drop as the full picture became clear. They hadn't just excluded me from their wedding, they had planned an expensive honeymoon that they couldn't afford, and now they expected me to fund their romantic getaway while I sat at home, devastated and alone. The audacity of it all hit me like a slap in the face. Here I was, still processing the fact that my only son had gotten married without me, and they were already asking for money to celebrate their union that I wasn't worthy enough to witness. I looked around my small apartment, at the wedding dress I had bought 6 months ago when David first mentioned he was thinking about proposing. It was hanging in my closet, tags still on, a beautiful navy blue dress that I had imagined wearing while dancing with my son at his reception. Now it would probably hang there forever, a painful reminder of dreams that would never come true. "Margaret, are you there?" Jessica's voice sounded impatient now, as if my silence was somehow inconveniencing her on her special day. I could hear David in the background saying something about room service, completely oblivious to the pain his mother was experiencing. This was the same boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who would make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day with burnt toast and too much syrup. When had he become someone who could hurt me so carelessly and then ask for money in the same breath? I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years. Working overtime at the hospital to pay for his college tuition, eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could send him spending money, canceling my own vacation plans when he needed help with a down payment for his apartment. I had always told myself that this was what love looked like, that good mothers put their children's needs before their own. But now I was beginning to understand that there was a difference between love and being taken advantage of, and I had been blind to it for far too long. The worst part wasn't even the money they were asking for. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement about how devastating this was for me. Jessica continued chattering about their hotel room and the beautiful beach, describing their wedding ceremony as if it had been this magical, spontaneous moment. "It was so romantic, Margaret. David surprised me with the ring yesterday morning, and we just decided to do it right then and there. You know how we are, always so impulsive. But I knew it wasn't impulsive at all. I had seen the wedding magazines in their apartment, the Pinterest boards Jessica had been making, the way David had been acting nervous and excited for weeks. They had planned this entire thing deliberately, and the only impulsive part was their decision to exclude me from it. As Jessica continued describing their perfect day, I found myself wondering if they had even thought about me at all. Had David hesitated for even a moment before walking down that aisle without his mother? Had he looked around the chapel and felt a pang of sadness that the woman who raised him wasn't there to witness the most important moment of his life? Or had my absence been such a relief that they didn't spare me a single thought? The photographer got the most amazing shots, Jessica gushed, and I felt another wave of nausea wash over me. There would be wedding photos, beautiful memories captured forever, and I wouldn't be in a single one of them. Someday their children would look through those albums and ask why Grandma wasn't at Daddy's wedding. What would they tell them? That Grandma wasn't important enough to invite? That she was just the person who paid for things but wasn't actually family? I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jessica, I need to go," I said, my hands trembling as I gripped the phone. "I can't. I need some time to process this." There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought maybe she would finally realize how much she had hurt me. Maybe she would apologize, or put David on the phone so he could explain himself. But instead, her voice turned cold and practical. "Okay, but what about the money transfer?" Jessica asked, as if my emotional devastation was just a minor inconvenience that shouldn't interfere with their financial needs. "The hotel is asking for payment tomorrow morning, and we really need that $2,000 tonight. Can you just do the wire transfer now, and we'll talk about everything else when we get back?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even in this moment, when any decent person would be apologizing profusely and trying to make things right, all she cared about was getting money out of me. That's when something inside me finally snapped. For years, I had been the perfect mother and mother-in-law, always available, always generous, always putting their needs before my own. I had convinced myself that this was love, that this was what family meant. But standing there in my kitchen, listening to Jessica demand money for a honeymoon celebrating a wedding I wasn't invited to, I finally realized that I had been enabling their selfishness for far too long. They didn't see me as a person with feelings. They saw me as a resource to be exploited. "No," I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. "No, Jessica. I will not be sending you any money for your honeymoon." The silence on the other end was deafening, as if she couldn't comprehend that I had actually refused one of their requests. "I think it's time for you and David to start taking responsibility for your own expenses, especially for celebrations that I'm apparently not important enough to be included in." Before I reveal what I did next, tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child excluded you from the most important day of their life and then immediately asked you to pay for their celebration? Leave a like if you think I was right to finally stand up for myself, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my situation. "Margaret, you're being ridiculous," Jessica snapped, her sweet facade completely dropping now that I had dared to say no to her. "We explained that it was spontaneous. We didn't plan this to hurt you. And besides, we really need this money. David's already promised the hotel we could pay, and if we can't, it's going to ruin our credit." The manipulation in her voice was so obvious now that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. She wasn't sorry about excluding me. She was just angry that her ATM was suddenly malfunctioning. I could hear David in the background, and finally he took the phone from Jessica. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. And for a split second, hearing his voice made my heart soften. This was my baby, the little boy I had rocked to sleep every night, the teenager I had stayed up with when he was stressed about college applications. "Jessica says you're upset about the wedding, but you have to understand it really was a spur-of-the-moment thing. We were just so excited that we couldn't wait." But then he continued, and the spell was broken. "And now we're in a really tough spot with this hotel bill. You know we're still paying off my student loans and Jessica's car, and we were really counting on your help. Can't you just wire the money and we'll explain everything better when we get home?" Even my own son saw me as nothing more than a financial safety net. There was no apology in his voice, no recognition of how much he had hurt me, just expectation that I would continue to fund their lifestyle regardless of how they treated me. "David," I said, my voice steadier now, "when you were 7 years old and broke my favorite vase, do you remember what you did?" There was a confused pause before he answered. I hid it and hoped you wouldn't notice," he said uncertainly. "And when I found the broken pieces, what did I teach you?" I continued. "You made me apologize and pay for a new one with my allowance money," he replied, sounding like he was wondering where this was going. "Exactly," I said. "I taught you that when you hurt someone, you apologize and you make it right. I taught you that actions have consequences. So tell me, David, where is your apology for getting married without telling your mother? Where is your acknowledgement that you broke my heart today?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I could practically feel David's discomfort through the phone as he realized that his mother wasn't going to just roll over and accept this treatment anymore. When he finally spoke, His voice had that whiny quality it used to have when he was a teenager trying to get out of trouble. Mom, you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. It's not like we planned it to exclude you specifically. We just wanted something simple and intimate. Simple and intimate, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. David, I've seen Jessica's social media. I know her parents were there. I know her sister was the maid of honor. I know her college roommate flew in from Denver to be a witness. So when you say intimate, what you really mean is that everyone who mattered to Jessica was there, and I didn't make that list. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me I had hit the mark. That's different, David stammered. Her family lives in Vegas, so it was convenient for them to be there. And Sarah was already visiting, so it just made sense. Every excuse he offered just dug the hole deeper. They hadn't excluded me because the wedding was too small or too spontaneous. They had excluded me because they simply didn't want me there, and now they were lying about it to avoid taking responsibility for their cruelty. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the years about his future wedding, how he used to joke that I would probably cry through the entire ceremony, and I would laugh and tell him he was absolutely right. How we had talked about father-daughter dances and how emotional it would be since his dad wasn't there to walk him down the aisle. How I had always assumed that when this day came, I would be the most important person there besides the bride. Now I was discovering that I hadn't even been an afterthought. Before we continue, let me know in the comments. What's the cruelest thing a family member has ever done to you? Answer me below in the comments because I want to know if anyone else has experienced this level of betrayal from the people who are supposed to love you most. Look, Mom, David said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. We can discuss all of this when we get back. Right now, we just need you to help us out with this hotel bill. Can you please just send the money? We'll have a long talk about everything else later. The audacity was breathtaking. He actually thought that he could dismiss my pain as something to be dealt with later, while expecting me to immediately solve their financial problems in the present. That's when I realized that this phone call was the perfect metaphor for our entire relationship over the past few years. They called when they needed something, made promises about spending more time together or being more considerate, and then disappeared until the next crisis required my wallet. I had been so desperate to maintain a connection with my son that I had accepted this pattern, convincing myself that helping them financially was a way of showing love. But love was supposed to be mutual. Love was supposed to involve respect and consideration, and including the people who matter in your important moments. What David and Jessica had been giving me wasn't love at all. It was manipulation wrapped in just enough affection to keep the money flowing. I thought about my late husband, Robert, and how disappointed he would be to see how our son had turned out. Robert had always taught David to treat people with kindness and respect, especially family. David, I said slowly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I will not be sending you any money for this trip. Not $2,000, not $200, not $20. If you can't afford your honeymoon, then you shouldn't have taken it. The sharp gasp from Jessica in the background told me that no one had ever spoken to them like this before. They were used to me being the compliant mother who always came through in the end. You can't be serious, Jessica's voice came back on the line, and now she sounded genuinely panicked. Margaret, we're stuck in Hawaii with no way to pay for our hotel. What are we supposed to do? Sleep on the beach? The desperation in her voice might have moved me a week ago, but now it just sounded like the tantrum of a spoiled child who wasn't getting her way. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. You're both college-educated adults with jobs, I replied calmly. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe you can call Jessica's parents since they were important enough to be invited to your wedding. Maybe you can use a credit card and actually pay for your own expenses for once. Or maybe you can cut your honeymoon short and come home to deal with your financial responsibilities like grown-ups. I could hear them whispering frantically in the background, probably trying to figure out which of their other relatives they could call for money. It occurred to me that I probably wasn't the only person they had been using over the years. There were probably other family members and friends who had been guilt-tripped into funding their lifestyle. People who had been told they were helping family when they were really just enabling financial irresponsibility. The phone went quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe they had hung up on me. But then David's voice came back, and it was colder than I had ever heard it. Fine, Mom. If that's how you want to be, then that's how it's going to be. But don't expect us to just forget about this when we get home. You're really showing your true colors here. His words were clearly meant to hurt me, to make me feel guilty and reconsider my decision. But instead of feeling guilty, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. For the first time in our relationship, I was being completely honest about how their behavior affected me. and I was setting boundaries that protected my own emotional and financial well-being. David, I said quietly, my true colors are that I'm a mother who loves you enough to stop enabling your irresponsible behavior. If you see that as a character flaw, then maybe we have bigger problems than I thought. You're being dramatic, Jessica chimed in from the background. It's just $2,000. You spend more than that on your car payment every month. The fact that she knew exactly how much my car payment was should have been a red flag years ago. They had been monitoring my finances, calculating how much they could extract from me based on what they thought I could afford. I was just a budget line item in their financial planning. Jessica, I said, it was never about the money. It was about respect and inclusion and treating me like family instead of like a bank account with feelings. But since you brought up finances, let me ask you something. How much money do you think I've given you both over the past 2 years? The silence told me they had never bothered to keep track, because they had never seen it as debt that needed to be repaid or even acknowledged. I had kept meticulous records, though. Every wire transfer, every check, every cash gift was documented in my financial software. Between rent help, car repairs, medical bills, vacation money, and emergency loans, I've given you $17,400 in the past 2 years. I continued. $17,400, and you couldn't even invite me to your wedding. The number hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. I heard Jessica gasp, and David muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. They had probably never added it up before, never realized exactly how much they had been taking from me while giving so little in return. $17,400 was more money than many people made in an entire year, and I had handed it over to them without question, because I thought that's what love looked like. That can't be right, David stammered. It was just small amounts here and there for emergencies. But I was ready for that response. I had printed out the bank statements before making this call, knowing that they would try to minimize their financial dependence on me. Would you like me to read you the list? I asked. September 15th, $600 for your car registration. October 3rd, $1,200 for Jessica's root canal. November 20th, $800 for Thanksgiving dinner and decorations. I continued reading dates and amounts, watching my generosity laid out in stark black and white. Each entry represented a time when I had prioritized their comfort over my own financial security, a time when I had said yes without hesitation, because I believed that helping them was the same as loving them. But love was supposed to be reciprocal, and this list was evidence of a completely one-sided relationship. Stop, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just stop reading it. I could hear her crying now, but I wasn't sure if the tears were from guilt or from frustration that their financial safety net was disappearing. We never asked you to keep track like that, she continued. We thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you were expecting something in return. I wasn't expecting something in return, I said, feeling years of suppressed frustration finally bubbling to the surface. I was expecting basic respect and consideration. I was expecting to be treated like family instead of like a convenient source of emergency funding. And I was expecting that when my only child got married, I would at least be told it was happening before it was over. My voice was getting louder now, all the anger and hurt from the past few hours finally finding their way out. You want to know what I was expecting? I continued. I was expecting phone calls that didn't end with requests for money. I was expecting holiday invitations that came because you wanted my company, not because you needed help paying for groceries. I was expecting that after 28 years of being your mother, I would be important enough to witness the most significant moment of your adult life. David tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. I have spent the last 2 years of my life working overtime shifts at the hospital to help support your lifestyle. I have eaten frozen dinners and skipped social events to save money so I could help you when you called. I have delayed my own retirement because every time I tried to build up my savings, one of you had an emergency that required my immediate financial assistance. The truth was pouring out of me now like water from a broken dam. And through all of this, I told myself that this was what good mothers do. I convinced myself that your happiness was more important than my own financial security. I believed that if I just helped you enough, if I just gave you enough, you would eventually see how much I loved you and start treating me with the respect and affection I deserved. But today proved that I was wrong about everything. I continued, my voice breaking slightly as the full weight of my realization hit me. Today I learned that no amount of money will ever make me important enough to be included in your lives in any meaningful way. You took my financial support for granted, and you took my love for granted, and you never even noticed how much you were hurting me in the process. Jessica's sobs were audible now, but they sounded more like frustration than genuine remorse. Margaret, We didn't know you felt this way, she managed between tears. You never said anything before. You always seemed happy to help us. The manipulation in her words was staggering. She was trying to make this my fault for not expressing my needs clearly enough, as if any reasonable person would think it was acceptable to exclude their mother-in-law from a wedding. I seemed happy to help because I was trying to be a good mother, I replied. I was trying to show you love in the only way you seem to value. But Jessica, let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. In the 2 years that I've been helping you financially, how many times have you called me just to see how I was doing? How many times have you invited me over for dinner that you were paying for? How many times have you asked about my life, my health, my feelings, without it being connected to a request for money? The silence stretched on so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Jessica whispered, We've been busy with work and everything. But her voice trailed off because we both knew the truth. She couldn't think of a single time because it had never happened. Their relationship with me was entirely transactional, and we had all been pretending otherwise. That's what I thought, I said sadly. David, do you remember when you were in high school and you wanted those expensive basketball shoes? I told you that you could have them if you saved up half the money yourself. Do you remember why I did that? I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, probably trying to figure out where this conversation was headed. You said you wanted me to learn the value of money and hard work, he answered reluctantly. Exactly, I continued. I wanted you to understand that things have value and that you appreciate them more when you've worked for them yourself. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that lesson. I started just giving you everything you wanted without making you work for it, and I created adults who think that money should just appear whenever they need it, without any consideration for where it comes from or what it costs the person providing it. I thought about my own parents, who had worked multiple jobs to put me through nursing school, but had still expected me to contribute and take responsibility for my own life. They had helped me when I truly needed it, but they had never created the kind of dependency that I had fostered with David. They had raised me to be self-sufficient and grateful, not entitled and demanding. The truth is that I've been a terrible mother to you, David, I said, the words tasting bitter but necessary. Not because I didn't love you enough, but because I loved you so much that I never taught you how to be a responsible adult. I never made you face consequences for your choices. I never forced you to develop the skills you needed to take care of yourself and your wife. Mom, you're not a terrible mother, David said, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice sounded genuinely emotional instead of just manipulative. You've always been there for us. You've helped us through some really tough times. But even his attempt at reassurance was focused on what I had done for him financially, not on any emotional connection or genuine appreciation for who I was as a person. David, being there for someone doesn't mean solving all their problems with money, I replied. It means caring about their well-being enough to help them grow into capable, independent adults. It means loving them enough to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices so they can learn and mature. I robbed you of those opportunities because I was afraid that if I didn't give you everything you wanted, you might not need me anymore. The irony was painful and obvious. In my desperate attempt to make myself indispensable to my son, I had actually made myself completely disposable. He didn't need me as a person. He just needed my bank account. And now that I was finally setting boundaries, he was angry and threatening to cut me off, proving that our relationship had never been based on genuine love and connection. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and determined. When you get home from your honeymoon that you'll have to figure out how to pay for yourselves, we're going to start over. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on financial transactions. I'm done being your emergency fund, and I'm done accepting crumbs of attention in exchange for unlimited financial support. You can't just cut us off like this, Jessica's voice came back on the line, angry and desperate. We have bills, Margaret. We have commitments. We planned our budget around your help. And there it was, the final proof that I had been nothing more than a line item in their financial planning. They hadn't seen my contributions as generous gifts from a loving mother. They had seen them as guaranteed income that they could count on indefinitely. Jessica, I said firmly, the fact that you planned your budget around my money is exactly the problem. You're both capable adults with good jobs. The only reason you can't afford your bills is because you've been living beyond your means, knowing that I would always bail you out. That stops today. I could hear her hyperventilating in the background, and part of me wanted to comfort her, to take it all back and wire the money just to make her stop crying. but I forced myself to remember the feeling of finding out about their wedding through a casual phone call. I made myself think about all the times I had eaten cereal for dinner so I could send them money for restaurants. I reminded myself of every canceled plan, every delayed purchase, every sacrifice I had made for people who couldn't even be bothered to include me in the most important moments of their lives. When you get home, I continued, if you want to rebuild our relationship, you're welcome to call me. But the conversation will not be about money. It will be about how we can create a genuine family bond based on love and respect, instead of financial dependency. And David, if you choose not to make that call, I'll understand that I was right about what I really meant to you. What would you do if you discovered that your family only valued you for your money? Tell me in the comments because I'm curious if anyone else has ever had to make a choice this difficult. The line went quiet except for Jessica's muffled sobs and the sound of David whispering frantically to someone in the background. I imagined them in their fancy hotel room, probably frantically calling Jessica's parents, or trying to figure out which credit card might still have enough available balance to cover their expenses. For the first time in years, their financial crisis was not my problem to solve. Mom, David said finally, his voice small and uncertain, what if we can't afford to get home? What if we get stuck here? I almost laughed at the question, because it perfectly demonstrated how completely dependent they had become on my financial support. They were both college graduates with professional jobs, but they apparently had no idea how to handle a basic financial emergency without calling me. David, you're 32 years old, I said patiently. You have a credit card, a bank account, and presumably some friends or family members who care about you for reasons other than money. If you can't figure out how to get home from Hawaii, then you have much bigger problems than I can solve by sending you money. The harsh reality was that if they truly couldn't afford this trip, they should never have taken it in the first place. I thought about all the financial emergencies they had called me about over the years, and how many of them were actually the result of poor planning and irresponsible spending rather than genuine crises. The car repair that could have been avoided with regular maintenance, the medical bills that could have been managed with proper insurance planning, the vacation expenses that should never have been incurred if they couldn't afford them. This isn't over, Mom, David said, his voice turning cold and threatening. When we get home, we're going to have a serious conversation about this. You can't just abandon your family when we need you most. The words stung, but they also revealed the truth about how he saw our relationship. In his mind, I existed to serve his needs, and any assertion of my own boundaries was a betrayal of my responsibilities as his mother. David, I said softly, I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to save you from a life of financial dependence and entitlement. I'm trying to love you enough to help you become the man your father would have been proud of. But if you can't see the difference between abandonment and boundary setting, then maybe we both have more work to do than I thought. I could hear Jessica crying harder now, and David muttering angry comments under his breath. They were probably already planning how to guilt me into changing my mind when they got home, probably strategizing about which emotional buttons to push to get me back in line. But for the first time in years, I felt strong enough to resist their manipulation. I love you both, I said, and I meant it despite everything that had happened. But I love you too much to continue enabling your irresponsible behavior. When you're ready to have an adult relationship with me, one that doesn't revolve around money, I'll be here. Until then, you're going to have to figure out how to be independent adults. And with that, I hung up the phone. As I set the phone down on my kitchen counter, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation that I had never experienced before. The silence in my apartment was profound, broken only by the ticking of the clock on my wall and the distant sound of traffic outside. For the first time in years, I wasn't immediately planning my next financial sacrifice or worrying about when the next emergency call would come. I was simply sitting with my own thoughts and feelings, rediscovering what it felt like to prioritize my own emotional well-being. The days that followed were both the hardest and the most peaceful of my life. David and Jessica did make it home from Hawaii, though I never found out exactly how they managed it. True to form, they immediately began a campaign to guilt me back into my role as their financial provider. There were angry voicemails, manipulative text messages, and even a few surprise visits that I politely but firmly refused to engage with. They tried everything from fake emergencies to threats of cutting me out of their lives completely. But something fundamental had changed in me during that phone call. I had finally seen our relationship clearly, without the fog of misplaced maternal guilt and desperate love that had clouded my judgment for so long. I realized that real love requires mutual respect, and that healthy relationships can't exist when one person is constantly taking while the other is constantly giving. I started going to therapy, rebuilding my social connections, and rediscovering hobbies and interests that I had abandoned to be available for their constant needs. 6 months later, David called me on my birthday, not to ask for money, but to apologize. He told me that being forced to manage their finances independently had been terrifying at first, but ultimately liberating. He said that Jessica had gotten a second job, that they had learned to budget and save, and that they were both grateful for the tough love I had shown them. He asked if I would like to meet them for dinner at a restaurant where they would be paying, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my son instead of talking to someone who saw me as a financial resource. Our relationship today isn't perfect, but it's real. We talk about our lives, our dreams, our struggles, and yes, sometimes about money, but in the context of teaching and learning rather than dependency and manipulation. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors, even when it breaks your heart in the process. And I've discovered that I'm actually a pretty interesting person when I'm not defining myself entirely through my ability to solve other people's problems with my checkbook. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics and financial boundaries in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between enabling someone you love and protecting your own well-being? Your stories might help other people who are facing similar situations feel less alone. And if you found this story helpful or thought-provoking, please consider sharing it with friends who might benefit from hearing it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and the courage it takes to change patterns that no longer serve us.